There are over 800,000 miles of communication cables lining the seafloor and circling continents. Around 95% of global internet traffic flows through those undersea cables. And it's time the U.S. government got serious about ensuring the security and resiliency of those cables. That's according to Justin Sherman, a non-resident fellow for the Cyber Statecraft Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Justin, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So what are the actual risks to these cables?
These cables, as you said, carry the vast majority of internet traffic around the globe, whether that's emails we're sending, social media posts we're making, videos we're watching. And so there's a risk that these cables, which are laid across the ocean floor, are compromised in a number of ways. You could have a boat literally run into a cable that's carrying traffic from one continent to another. You could have nation states that are attempting to hack into or somehow disrupt the flow of that traffic for various reasons. So, it's a key reminder that for all the internet is digital, it relies on this physical stuff to run.
So tell me a little bit more about cyber hacking of the information on those cables. And is that a bigger threat now than it was before when this kind of technology was first established?
Yeah, these cables have been around for decades and decades. They first carried telegraph communications years ago, right? So they predate the internet a lot. That said, the more and more we load data onto these cables, the more and more that countries are trying to hack into those cables to see that information. And so, virtually every country in the world tries to do this to spy, but the more data we have flowing over these systems, the more damaging those hacks can be.
And at what point can they be actually hacked? Obviously the cable itself, would be secure that way, wouldn't it?
There are a couple of ways to tap into a submarine cable. So you can lay like a black box device literally on top of a cable underwater. You could build a back door into a cable before you even lay it under the ocean so that you're already spying before it even is activated. But every cable also has at least two landing stations, which are the facilities at which that cable touches a shoreline. And so there's all kinds of equipment and software at those landing stations that's vulnerable to hacking as well.
So you mentioned remote network management systems for cable infrastructure. How does that introduce more risk to the security of the cables?
That has to do with these landing stations I just mentioned. So the companies that manage these cables, like many other companies, want to be able to control things remotely, monitor things off-site without having someone physically present at a facility. And so they're using these internet-connected tools to say, how much traffic is flowing, are there any disruptions? The problem is when you're linking these cables that carry 95% of our traffic to the internet in that way, it's easy for a hacker to break in without even touching the cable itself and mess with the data or spy on what people are saying.
So what is the cable ship security program?
The US government stood up a program essentially saying these cables are so essential to the economy, to national security, to everyday life that we're going to have a couple ships on standby, government licensed, government subsidized ships, that in the event one of these cables is damaged, we can quickly repair it. And so this is something that's still getting off the ground right now, but it's really important because even something like an accident that damages a cable, takes out some internet connection, could really have a damaging effect on US businesses and our everyday lives as Americans.
So submarine cables are owned by combinations of private industries, public stakeholders. Who should take the lead on establishing security protocols to protect them?
That's the key question. You have governments, even, and companies from all over the world, hundreds of them that invest in these cables. And so there isn't one entity that controls these cables. And even for cables touching the US, there's no single firm in charge. And so that's why it's really key for the US government to do two things. One, to work more with industry to incentivize better security, but two, to do more outreach and diplomacy to these overseas companies and governments that invest in the cables too.
So, I mean, when you say the government, is there a particular government agency that should take the lead for, ensuring security for the cables?
Yeah, I think the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, in the Commerce Department is really, really good and credible in developing security standards. And so having them work on some security best practices would be really useful. And then in the State Department, there's a lot of cyber capacity building going on, trying to work with other countries to help them boost their cybersecurity. And so making cables and this infrastructure a part of those programs is a really important mission.
And what about Congress, Justin? What role should they play in protecting this internet infrastructure?
Congress is the one that stood up the cable ship security program you mentioned. And so continuing to build that out is one way Congress can help. The other main way Congress can do some good here is the U.S. government group in the executive branch, Team Telecom, that is supposed to review these cables, foreign cables, for security risks, doesn't really have enough authorities or money. And so putting more into that would be really, really important.
All right. Well, Justin, thanks so much. Nice to have you on the program.